Welcome back to the Post Definitions podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Lancha, and today our guest is Connlaodh, a ceasefire baby who grew up going to an all-girls Catholic school in Northern Ireland. Even though she lived completely after the Troubles, they continued to define Northern Irish life and identity. Let's find out how. Yeah, you said that what you see is what you get. I am who I am. What aspects of identity are a choice?
Oh, that is a fabulous question. Everything I think is... Well, here's the thing. I think you're born a certain way. There is this question of, I remember growing up, my mum used to talk about, all babies are a blank slate and you teach a lot of things too. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think you have to make the choice to be true to who your own internal identity is, because you go through life, you make these decisions, but these decisions were kind of who you were always, in the beginning, and maybe you were pushed into a certain direction because of the culture around you or the people. You had to adapt to survive as a child or a young teenager, and then hopefully you sort of figure out who you are and you figure out your identity by making certain choices, but it is always coming back to who you were in the beginning, if that makes any sense. So I would say there is an element of choosing to be your own self rather than, well, I'm making a choice to be this way. Choice is definitely there, but it's more a tool rather than what your identity is. It's a tool to find your identity.
So is it you have these moments where you get to choose between what society wants and what you are? Or is it more like you are this person inside and that dictates the decisions you make?
It's a mixture of both, I think, because I think there is growing up as a teenager, I remember there were so many choices I made early on that I would say were the wrong choices. I did sort of do what other people expected me to do for the longest time, and that has had an effect on my emotional growth and my identity, and because it's taken me a long time to get where I am today. And if I had made certain choices earlier, maybe I would have a clearer idea, or I would be more ahead than I am now. So there is a question of there's society, going with society or against society or whatever it is to be the truer version of you. But I think also it's that question of the inner child. What does the inner child need to be happy? And because the inner child at the end of the day, that is who you were. That is the naked, pure essence of who you are as a person. And I always think that honoring that child and listening to that inner part of yourself is vital to your growth as a person and to who you are as or who you identify to be. No matter whether it is in question of culture or religion or gender or artistic choices or your artistic identity or who you see yourself as being in society, what kind of family you want to be and what your role in that family is. There's so many different identity avenues to look at.
What kind of decisions did you have to make about identity in your life?
Oh my goodness, so many. How much time have you got?
How much time have you got?
Well, I'm training to be a musician. I'm training to be a soprano, and it's been very eye-opening to see how much of an artistic identity you need with that alone. And then there's identity of who do I see myself as living in a different country to where I was born. Stuff like sexual identity, comfortable in my own gender. There's been so many things that I feel should have been discussed or talked about while I was a teenager, while I was figuring all this stuff out, which just didn't happen. That I've actually been able to properly question and check in with myself, I guess is a good way to say, am I okay? Am I comfortable in my gender? Yes, I am. Am I comfortable in my sexuality? I am now. How do I feel about my place in the universe and my religion and my culture? How do I feel about that? They've been tougher questions to answer recently. And sometimes you can't really answer these questions until you are faced with a certain community or a change in circumstance or location or group of, like, I'm now a student again, so I'm seeing life in a different way than I would have when I was working a couple of years ago, or when I was in COVID, or again when I was at university doing my bachelor's first time round. So it's the constant change of people, like, constantly gives me different avenues, attitudes, opens up more questions about, oh, but have you considered this as a part of your identity? So it's all an evolution, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you talk to like a 15-year-old who, like, to help them, give some advice, or maybe what do teenagers need to be taught, or
I think the first thing you should always tell teenagers is, because I used to teach teenagers, I don't know if I mentioned this, I used to teach teenagers how to sing, and there is a kind of a strange pastoral relationship you have to have there, because in order for kids to sing using their own voice, to be exposed to, you know, the big scary, oh my goodness, there's a big scary audience I suddenly have to perform for. If you put up any kind of mask or wall, you're shooting yourself in the foot immediately. You're going to forget words. You're going to use a tone of voice that's fake and artificial. So I was constantly asking, it was mostly girls, I was constantly asking the girls, well, what do you actually think about this? What's your opinion on this? And it was done in a way where they weren't expected to give a certain answer. And a lot of them, I think, were very thrown off by the fact they were given control over a situation. I think teenagers, we take so much for granted how individualistic they are. And yeah, there is a certain, we need to gently guide them towards, you know, not murdering people. But I think there is an inherent goodness to teenagers that the wider world doesn't accept. Most of them are the nicest group of people, honestly, but we treat them still like kids, and that's what infuriates them, and thinks that they have to go a certain way, or they have to adapt to whatever other influences are around them, whether that is when it comes to cultural identity, sexual identity, whatever the identity is. A lot of them can't really express that, which is why so many of them, me included, went through an emo phase in the 2000s, because it was a case of I wasn't allowed to be myself at all, to the point that I went to the extreme end, and I had to, because I had to express myself in some way. So, you know, bad fashion choices were made, and terrible music was listened to, and, you know, we would say things to our parents that we regret, that were hurtful, just because we felt so stuck in a box. So I think if I was talking to a bunch of teenagers and trying to ask them questions that I think were helpful, is just constantly asking them their opinion on things, and making it very, very clear that their opinion matters, and it's okay to be wrong. And that they shouldn't be answering the question because I'm expecting a certain answer. Yeah. It's like, what do you actually think about this? Let's literally have a seat at the big grown-up table. Let's talk about this. What's your opinion?
Yeah, it sounds a lot like the issue could be that people are assuming their identity, like they're assuming, oh, these are children, you're assuming their opinions, and that they should, like, listen to, and all they want to do is be heard for who they are, right?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of sort of certainly around the parents, on the parent level, I think there's a lot of people who want to mold, especially girls, into a certain version of themselves. Like, how many sort of mums out there want their girls to aspire to be more than what they were growing up, like, are sort of like fueling their own dreams through their own daughters, for example. And don't get me wrong, like, boys are under a similar pressure as well. I can only speak from my personal experience. But, like, I think there is that thing of, there's a lot of kids nowadays who are trying to be a version of themselves that their parents had envisioned for them, and then that takes away choice for them to express their own identity.
Yeah. Are there questions even today that you wish people asked more
of teenagers?
No, of, like, you, of adults.
Of me, or
like,
of adults?
You know, like, what's your opinion on this, or things that people aren't really allowed to share their opinion on, even when they might. It's a very hard question.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I think it's less that, I think there should be more questions about, or even just more conversations about it's okay to be wrong. And it's okay to be wrong and say, I'm sorry. I feel like there's a lot of people nowadays who are so embarrassed and ashamed to say sorry that they go so hard on whatever their argument is, regardless of whether or not they're correct, because they don't want to be seen as the idiot in the room. I apologize for things all the time. I will make a statement, and if people say, I don't think that's quite right, Connlaodh, I'll say, is it not? Oh, I thought I heard this. Oh, my apologies. I'm so sorry. I haven't researched that enough. I say that all the time. I'm constantly apologizing for stuff, but then I'm constantly learning stuff and growing as an individual. I think especially on the internet, there's a lot of people who absolutely refuse to back down and apologize for things.
Like, when's the last time you saw sorry on the internet?
Honestly, Colin Ballinger, and fair enough. It's like that was a bad one. But it was like, I remember how like shameful a YouTube apology used to be. I'm so sorry for all these things that I did, for all these things that I said, these things that were funny 10 years ago on the internet and are suddenly not funny now. I think there's a lot of shame around being able to say sorry on the internet, and I think there needs to be I think those apologies should be not necessarily celebrated, but vindicated. Of this person's now learning. He could very, very easily say, oh, you guys are coming after me and trying to cancel me for that. It's a lot better to say, look, I'm really, really sorry. And there a lot of people were doing that on the internet a few years back. And now you've got people saying, no, actually, do you know what? Freedom of speech is kind of my right. And I said those things. And I'm not going to continue saying them, but I don't think I have the right to apologize. Because I think they're scared of being seen as weak or something. I think there's great power in being able to say sorry for things.
Yeah. Well, maybe okay when you don't say sorry, it's also kind of maybe saying what you're also saying, that like, it's okay that I was wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe they feel like if I say sorry, I admit that it's not okay to be wrong or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I kind of see both. That would be my feeling. Like about saying sorry, it's like, when I say sorry, it kind of feels like I was wrong and I shouldn't have been, or something.
Whereas I think the conversation needs to change to say, I am sorry I was in the wrong. This is a great opportunity for me to be a better person. I think that's what the conversation needs to be. I'd love to sit down with a bunch of teenagers and say, look, next few years, you're going to get things wrong. And there is no shame in that. Make your mistakes and learn from them. The absolute worst thing you can do is make a mistake, not learn from it, and then basically hold on to that idea or whatever it is. Because I think that's where a lot of people fall down extremist pipelines, because they did something wrong, they said sorry, and then felt terrible by it. And then thought, okay, well, if these people are making me feel terrible about being sorry, why should I say sorry in future?
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, well, all these other people agree with me. They feel like they've been victimized. And then suddenly you're listening to Jordan Peterson podcasts.
I can definitely relate to like this idea of like, yes, we should say sorry. It's okay to be wrong. But then as soon as you're wrong, you're like, oh, but this, like, I feel really like I'm really wrong, and I don't feel in this case like okay about it, because I really think what I did was wrong, and you just feel too much shame, and now you reject that whole concept of like I should be okay with this. So I can imagine that some people are like, yes, it's okay to be wrong, but then as soon as they're wrong, they're like not. They're like, for instance, it's easier sometimes to forgive someone else than forgive yourself, if that makes sense. Do you have any like examples of like times where you felt like what you did was wrong, but actually it was just such a growing moment?
Yeah, I have so many, and I could go into so much detail, and there's so many different circumstances as well. I think it's always that thing, for some people, we always assume that we're wrong immediately, even though it's less that, or at least, you sort of get balled up in the shame of it, that it becomes paralyzing, and not actually treating it as a moment of, oh no, this is a good opportunity for me to turn around to the other person and ask, or basically say, here, I really messed up. I really, really fucked up. But I don't understand how I got here. Could you could you help me out? What can I do to make this better? What can I do to learn from this so that it doesn't happen again? It probably will happen again in some avenue, but at least I'm now aware of it and I can build from this.
Yeah. I would also like to say that if you say like, I don't know how I got here. I was trying my best and now I did this thing that was so bad. And that's probably like not all your fault. Probably if it's like an issue with like one person, like in a relationship, and you did something so wrong, probably there was some elements of the other person in that whole decision and the way, and you're like, okay, we need to actually adjust together, or it can be in a broader like society or something like this that allowed you to, and you don't have to take all the blame. Maybe
I think it's the not taking there is a certain responsibility for you to take blame, but at the same time be aware that, because if you take on all of the blame all of the time, your self-esteem is going to go through the floor, and that does no one good. It leaves you vulnerable to people who would take advantage of that, and it's not a good thing at all. I think it's just better understanding of the situation, which is why going back to the whole telling 15-year-olds that it's okay to apologize for stuff, 15-year-olds and slightly younger are going to be able to take that on as like a normal thing in a way that adults can't, because adults have kind of finished growing. If you normalize it and make it a part of life at a younger age, I think people are more okay with it. Whereas I think I was starting to apologize for things like that weren't even my fault when I was much younger, and then it became very normal for me to just apologize for everything. And it's taken me a very long time to recognize, yes, I did this wrong, but the other person is also partly to blame as well. And I'm going to not accuse them of being an asshole or anything. I'm going to say, look, I messed up in this way, but you kind of enabled me to do that. You were very, very happy for, or whatever the situation is, you were very, very happy for me to take all the blame, where you have to recognize that you are also to blame a little bit as well. I'm not accusing you of anything dastardly or evil or calling you a bad person, but can we talk about this? Can we build from this? Because I like you as a friend or as a romantic partner or whoever it is in my life, and I don't want our relationship to be thrown because of this. I think this is a good opportunity for us to grow as people.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe one more thing I can add to that is sometimes what happens is actually both parties, they're both angry at the other. They both think the other person was in the wrong. So then, of course, neither person is going to apologize. If you were also going to forgive, that also doesn't work, because you're like, I'm forgiving you, like, but I didn't do anything wrong. But so you need to do something that's neither apologizing nor forgiving. It's more like, you know what? I don't care about this. And I hope you can also say, I don't care about this, and we value our relationship more.
That is one way of doing it. I do think that they do need to care about it. Otherwise, you're avoiding the situation. If you say, okay, do you know what? This is so small and insignificant. Let's not bother thinking about this. You could potentially be delaying another argument. You've kind of decided to avoid doing any work. And maybe the argument was something very stupid and petty, and maybe the two people can go in their separate ways and go, okay, well, listen, we're both tired. It's been a long week. We've had to put up with your mother-in-law. I can't cope with this. Like, it's it's very, very difficult. But I think there is an argument about someone fighting for you rather than against you. So like, we're having an argument, fight with me. Come on, let's actually have this conversation. Fight for this relationship. Because I've been in arguments with people where they've given me the brush off because they don't want to fight. And it's a case of, you clearly don't care about this argument when I clearly do. So one of us is fighting for something here, and the other person doesn't care that much. So I think it depends on the conversation, because I get what you're saying about not wanting to care about the little things, but I think if I'm able to fight with someone and they really care about me understanding their point of view, and so long as they're willing to work with me during the fight, then that's important. That can make a relationship, I think, stronger.
Okay. Yeah, fair point. So we've been kind of talking about like an argument between maybe two people.
Yeah.
What Maybe we can relate this to situation from where you're from.
Yeah,
In-
God. If only people would talk to each other. Yes.
In Northern Ireland, where there are sort of two political groups.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation what Northern Ireland is. So basically, to anyone who has no idea what we're talking about, so Northern Ireland is a part of the UK, but it's also geographically part of Ireland. So politically, our parliament, our legislation, our economy, the business side of things, all of that is UK based or controlled. But geographically, Northern Ireland is part of Ireland. And the reason why it exists is Ireland was invaded by the English 800, 900 years ago. I can't quite remember the exact date. And there was a war in the 20th century called the Anglo-Irish War, which kind of then led to the Free State of Ireland and then the Republic of Ireland. But the sort of bargaining, the consolation prize was that the loyalist unionists in the north were able to keep Northern Ireland, these 6 counties, as part of the UK, because there was such a discussion and argument that there were so many people in the north who actually wanted to stay a part of the UK that it was better to partition Ireland to keep the peace. And also, it was at that time, most of the people in the north of Ireland were of a, I hate using the term Protestant because religion has nothing to do with it, but most of them were from a British heritage, and so they wanted to set up their own government while still being part of the UK and leave the rest of Ireland to the nationalist Catholic majority. So because there was a Protestant majority, they were able to sort that out. Nowadays, it's more 50-50, and I actually think there's now more Irish Catholics in Northern Ireland than there are Protestants. But I have to be very careful with my terminology here, because religion at the end of the day has nothing to do with it. You have people who identify as Irish, people who identify as British, and then the new generation who see themselves as Northern Irish.
And you?
Oh, I love this question. I hate and love this question. I grew up, on the full disclosure, I grew up Irish. I was living in the absolute middle of nowhere, surrounded by farms. So there was me, my brother and sister, and my family, and we were in the middle between a town that was very Irish Republican and a town that was very British loyalist. We very rarely went to the British town, even though it was closer. Our primary school was in the Republican Catholic town. Our church was there. Our granny happened to live there, so we were more closely connected to that. But because we didn't play with the kids on the street from there, we were kind of in our own little bubble. And we would spend a lot of time, just the 3 of us, watching Disney movies and playing Nintendo growing up, and, having that kind of artistic fun, but in a bubble childhood. And then I remember the first time I was called a Fenian would have been, I think I was 12, and I was going to high school for the first time, and my high school was in a very loyalist unionist town. And I was so confused. I had no idea what they were talking about. But because I was wearing the uniform that clearly indicated that I went to the Catholic school, I got called Fenian. And a couple of other not so nice words. And that was the first time I was like, oh, this is weird. Why do people not like me? At least get to know my personality and decide I don't like me. That's fair enough. But it was a very weird thing to experience. And then we went to school, and then part of our junior certificate, the GCSEs, was learning about this thing called the Troubles, which was a war that suddenly it was a case of, hold on, my mum and dad went through British Army occupation and I wasn't told about it? Like, I had no idea about this until I was a teenager. And growing up, I'd always called myself Irish. Yay, it's St. Patrick's Day, I'm Irish, there you go. But we would suspiciously always go to Ireland around the 12th of July, which is when the loyalists celebrate being British, and would traditionally not be very nice about the Catholic population while expressing their British identity. It's gotten a lot better in recent years, but there's still places and avenues, and it's a very controversial holiday. So I was happy to call myself Irish until I became a teenager and then learnt about the history of Northern Ireland. Because I was like, yeah, we're Irish. We use the pound. They use the euro down south. Never questioned that. And I did Irish dancing growing up. I went to the local Irish music cultus. I learned to sing sean-nós singing, which is a form of Irish singing. So I was very happy to be Irish until I went to secondary school, and then suddenly you were declaring a side. It was a case of, well, I'm Irish, these are my people, this is us, and the British are them.
Did you ever get asked?
If I was Irish or British?
Yeah.
All the time, especially then when I went to that school, because, you know, you would hang out with people from that area a wee bit more, and suddenly it was a case of you would be dancing with a boy in a disco, and the first thing he'd want to know is, are you Catholic or Protestant? Like that was a whole like thing. You need to know who you're dating. It's not even a problem. It's like this inherent biases that Northern Irish people have, where you could be talking to a stranger no matter who they are, and you could be really getting on with them, but in the back of your mind you need that question answered so that you're okay making certain jokes, or just you know where you stand. There's this weird tiny insecurity with a lot of Northern Irish people in their head where it's like, I'm talking to you in Northern Ireland. Oh, hello Freddie, how are you? Probably a Protestant, his name's Freddie. That's what's going on in the back of my head. It's not a thing when I'm here in Maastricht, and that is wonderfully freeing. But it's this weird internal biases where we have that in the back of our head.
Yeah. And do you have that bias? Like, or is it more like, oh, this is probably a Protestant, so they're not going to be very nice to me? Or
I don't have... Here's the thing. I do have that bias, even though I do not care. I do not care where you come from. I literally don't. I don't care what part of the side that you come from, but I need to know. And that's not because I'm going to treat you any different, but it's because I need to know what level of jokes I can make with you. Like, for example, if we're chatting for the first time and, you know, we're having fun, I want to crack a certain joke, but I don't want to offend you in case you come from the other side. And it's like, if I want to make an IRA related joke, I don't know what your parents went through during the 70s. So God only knows what will come out of my mouth. Whereas if I know that I'm surrounded by Catholics, I can use certain words in front of it. I can say, oh, we're all Fenians here, this is fine. Like, you know, we can make certain jokes, but there's a weird biases. First guy I ever dated, first question my mum asked was, is he a Catholic or a Protestant? It was the first question she asked, not, well, how did you meet?
So your mom cared?
My mum cared. Again, she is not sectarian or biased or anything. It's just something Northern Irish people, they need to know. They're desperate to know.
Yeah.
So the first thing, like, my mum and dad used to talk about, you know, taking, like when they went out to the disco during the Troubles, while all this fighting was going on and there were British soldiers stopping a lot of Catholics in the street for identification and making sure they weren't carrying guns or anything. They would stop people and say, okay, how's it going, darling? Where are you from? And if she said Belfast, they'd go, okay, Belfast, that's a lot of ground to cover. Could be Catholic, could be Protestant. What school did you go to here, darling? Well, I went to an integrated school in a Catholic area. Okay, so that's neither Catholic specific. It could be a mix of two. What's your name, darling? My name is Mary. Okay, might be Catholic, but I don't know. I'd probably Catholic. Let's go with that. So then they wouldn't need to ask. And my dad used to talk about the fact there's a joke of, or he had a friend or something who at one point halfway through dancing in the disco, he literally dropped the girl's hands and went, oh, for fuck's sake, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? I need to know. Because he'd been asking all these questions trying to work out and couldn't figure it out.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And then once you know, it's more than just the jokes?
I think it's just sort of, they need to know, they need to have that question answered.
Okay.
It's not, some people will be sectarian about it. Some people will say, and again, it's more in sort of extremist neighborhoods now where stuff like loyalist or Republican identity is a lot more reinforced. Northern Ireland's a lot better now because it's been a few generations now. But there is still that thing of, well, is she a Catholic or is she a Protestant? My sister is dating a boy from East Belfast. She's Catholic. He would have been brought up very loyalist, but he doesn't give. He really, really doesn't give a shit about any of that. But then he would fall out with members of his family because of it. And the first family gathering she went to was his granddad's funeral, I think it was some member of the family's funeral, and he hadn't told them that not only was he dating someone, but that she was a Catholic. And my sister went in with this knowledge and was her full non-filtered self and just went, right, I'm gonna have a lot of fun here, because she just didn't care. She went, I mean, come on, they're gonna get to know who I am now. But she did say to me, I am a bit scared about going to this funeral, because what happens if someone is really not nice about me? There was an element of fear, that just a tiny bit, but she's got such a wonderfully big personality that she doesn't care.
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing, but it's an unconscious biases.
Yeah.
In that, and that everyone in Northern Ireland has. It's like when you go into like a club, the first thing, if you're looking for a girlfriend, the first thing you're going to ask is, I wonder if she's single. I'm not even that interested, but I wonder if she's single. It's kind of that for all of Northern Ireland. We need to know what side of the fence you're on. I was asked, I heard this joke once. There was a guy at our university who had grown up in Belfast but was Buddhist. So he was of Thai descent, and so had grown up Buddhist, but he had grown up in Northern Ireland. And I heard someone say, yeah, but are you a Catholic Buddhist or are you a Protestant Buddhist? Because they need to know. They need to know what side of the fence. They need to
put them in a box.
Yeah, literally. It's a case of, no, this is the dichotomy here.
Wow. That's amazing. And how are attitudes shifting, if you can say?
It's slower than I'd like. I think there is still, it's a lot better than what it used to be. Like, the Troubles ended in 1998, which was the year I was born. So that's how old the peace has been. My generation in particular, were
the
called
Troubles, as in like the bombs,
all the bombings and stuff, or at least the IRA no longer being a functioning paramilitary group. Well, there are sort of dissidents and fractions now, but certainly in that it's the IRA versus the British Army occupying the streets and keeping the peace and everything. So we're like the ceasefire babies. We're meant to be the shining example of what Northern Ireland could be. And you still have sectarianism, you still have a lot of problems. It is a lot better than it used to be, but there are certain institutions that are keeping the divide there. For example, certain traditions, kind of like the 12th of July, and people would turn around and say, yeah, but St. Patrick's Day, you're expressing your Irish heritage. 12th of July, we're expressing our British heritage. And I would say, yeah, but I feel like there's a better way you could go about it, where you're not endangering residents of the local area. You could make it a bit more inclusive. And there have been motions to do that, but I haven't heard of very many. There hasn't been okay, we're going to have this big, I think they call it Orange Fest, where they're trying to like make it more of like a, similar to what you guys have here in Connlaodh. They're trying to make it more of a party for everyone. But at the same time, I know very, very few Catholics. I don't know a single Catholic who would actually go to that. I'm sure they exist, but I don't know of any. Another institution that's kind of holding the two apart is our political system. Because the two biggest parties in power, one of them represents the Protestants and one of them represents the Catholics, and it's built into law that there has to be one of each in power to keep the peace treaty in effect. Because during the Troubles, and traditionally, one of the reasons they started was because Catholics really didn't have much voting power at all. They were not given the same kind of voting equality. There was gerrymandering, so the loyalist vote was going to be stronger and would forever be stronger than any kind of nationalist vote. So that's kind of what kick-started the whole Troubles. So the fact that it's built into our law and our politics is we need to have someone on the nationalist side and we need to have someone on the unionist side. As our system functions, it's you can understand why it was needed at the time of the ceasefire to keep the peace, but it's also just creating that divide, or it's maintaining that divide of, okay, well, there's us and there's them. Mm-hmm. When it comes to voting, when I was in Northern Ireland, it was against my ethics to vote for any kind of political party that declared themselves as being for one side over the other. So I couldn't vote for Sinn Féin or SDLP, even though I was Catholic nationalist, whatever you want to call it. I could only vote for the Green Party, which was completely unbiased, and then this other political party called Alliance, which is literally built of people from both communities with absolutely no, that's why they're called Alliance.
Yeah.
They were the yellow party in the middle that no one votes for.
Yeah.
But they were the only two political parties I could in my head ethically vote for, because
But
I
that's
didn't.
so few options, because even if you agree with Alliance, they obviously also have other political stances, right?
They do, absolutely. They are moderates. I would be slightly more left-wing engaged rather than completely moderate, but I couldn't vote for them. People would say, well, you're left-wing, why not vote for Sinn Féin? But then Sinn Féin's got its own problem, where because it's tied to the Catholic Church and the Catholic vote, they have to keep the Catholic Church happy. And we all know how left-wing the Catholic Church is. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's I think those kind of institutions are still reinforced. Oh, and schools as well. Schools are still divided by, are you going to go to the Catholic school, or are you going to go to the integrated, or sort of a church? I don't know what they're called, actually. I'm thinking about it now. The sort of Protestant-leaning schools. They tend to be more integrated, but there's still a big force to get Catholic kids into Catholic schools because they tend to do academically better. So there's a lot of parents wanting to put them in.
Okay.
Yeah. So old institutions, I think, are holding us back.
Yeah.
And then what our parents are telling us as well,
yeah.
which is a whole other problem.
How are Irish identifying people in Northern Ireland accepted in Ireland, and British identifying people accepted in the UK?